Hey, what's up guys? Chris here. In this video we'll be discussing the existence of God. The existence of God can be proven with many evidences and logical arguments. However, in this video only 3 evidences and logical arguments will be presented. This includes a philosophical argument, a scientific evidence, and a historical evidence. The philosophical argument has 3 parts. First, there cannot be an infinite regress of causes, therefore there must be an uncaused first cause. Second, the only sufficient explanation for the uncaused first cause is God. 3. Therefore, God must exist as the uncaused first cause. We will now thoroughly examine each part, finally proving the conclusion true. We will logically begin with the first part. This is proven factual by simply critically thinking about it. This part can be related to a Rube Goldberg machine or even something as simple as a line of dominoes. In both instances, one step that occurred caused another step to occur, which caused yet another step to occur, and so on indefinitely until it produces the final cause, until it finally comes to a stop. For this, let's focus on just 3 causes, using dominoes to clearly picture it, and then go on to a larger scale. The last cause does not exist until the middle cause occurs, and that middle cause does not exist until the first cause occurs. If one domino is knocked over, it will hit into the next domino, which will hit into the next domino. The 2 last dominoes will not fall until the first domino is knocked over. We can see very well how this will occur on a larger scale, which is all of the causes that have occurred within the universe so far. Due to the fact that one cause will not exist without a previous cause occurring, which will also not exist without a previous cause occurring, which even that cause will not exist without a previous cause occurring, and so on. That means that because there is in fact reality, because there are in fact cause and effects relationships occurring right now, there must have been an uncaused first cause to begin the series of causes. If this uncaused first cause did not exist, reality would simply not exist, as each cause will remain non-existent because it is awaiting a previous cause, which is also remaining non-existent for the exact same reason. And so that would go back infinitely in time. However, reality, cause and effect relationships do exist, as we can clearly observe. Therefore, an uncaused first cause did exist. This is an absolute necessity and must logically be accepted. Now we will examine the second part of the argument. All other explanations suggested aside from God can be summarized into 2 main explanations for convenience: something or nothing. In order to be considered the uncaused first cause, as the name clearly states, it must be possible to have eternally existed. As we will soon see, only God can possibly be eternally existent, not requiring a cause beforehand, while both something and nothing do require further causes. I will begin by examining something, then examine nothing, and finally end by examining God. Something can possibly be broken down into smaller categories, such as something colliding with another something, something exploding, or something expanding. However, the categories it can be broken down into are rather trivial, as even if it were to be thought for a second that something could be eternally existent, it does not sufficiently explain the uncaused first cause, as it itself requires another cause. This is, of course, unless it never changes. If it were eternally existent, it would still, at this point in time and forever in the future, be itself, still with the same properties as it has always had. However, we know that this is not the case, as we live in a universe filled with cause and effect relationships. Therefore, this something must have changed in some way. However, a great question could then be asked: what caused the eternally existent something to change? Due to it being required to have changed, it also requires a separate cause, as an inanimate something is not capable of changing itself. This simply does not sufficiently explain the uncaused first cause, as it requires a previous cause. It would only be, at most, the first cause second cause, rather than the uncaused first cause. Nothing cannot be broken down into any smaller categories, as nothing can only refer to one thing: absolute non-existence of anything. From absolute pure nothingness, nothing will ever come, no matter how much time is given. Even if an infinite amount of time, there will still not be anything. This view is, of course, not held by many. Nevertheless, I felt the need to mention this possible explanation posed by some, as it seems rather arrogant and ignorant to think that another viewpoint is not even worthy of critically thinking about and discussing. If you listen critically and carefully to those who speak on this, they always equivocate nothing with something. But this is an outright contradiction. One person has even stated that he's not really talking about nothing, and that nothing isn't nothing anymore in physics. There's not a gray area between what something is and what nothing is. It is either something or it is nothing. Therefore, if it is not nothing being discussed, it must be something, which, as we have already seen, does not sufficiently explain the uncaused first cause, since it requires a previous cause. For the sake of this posed explanation, though, let's imagine in our minds that something can suddenly come from nothing. This, just as something did, requires a previous cause, as shown by this question. What caused nothing to become something? This posed explanation does not sufficiently explain the uncaused first cause, as even it requires a previous cause. It would, in the same way as something, be at most the first caused second cause rather than the uncaused first cause. As we have seen, both explanations posed do not sufficiently explain the uncaused first cause. We will now examine God, the Judeo-Christian God, which I will prove to be the one true God with the historical evidence, is said to have spoken the universe into existence. I ask then, what caused God to speak the universe into existence? Perhaps at first, without critically thinking about this, it sounds as though the same problem arose for this explanation as it did for the first two we examined. However, let us proceed, as we will soon see that this is not the case. The answer to this question, still remaining with the explanation of God, is that God desired to create the universe, and so spoke the universe into existence. Of course, I then ask, what caused God to desire to create the universe? This question is asked in an illogical manner, however, as it asks specifically about the internal decision of a mind while expecting an answer relating to an external cause. That is the way the first two explanations examined occur, however. Neither were minds, being inanimate things or being nothing at all. Thus, they required an answer relating to an external cause. However, in this case, since God is, by definition, a being who does indeed possess a mind, the answer lies within the mind of God. God, being a being with a mind, is capable of thoughts and actions which do not require influence externally, but can be made internally at will. This very attribute is what all other views do not have, but what is absolutely required of the uncaused first cause. The uncaused first cause must indeed be able to initiate that first cause without any external causes, which requires it to be able to initiate that first cause with an internal decision with free will. If one wonders why God desired to create us, there is a great answer to that question on www.gotquestions.org/whydidgodcreateus.html. Therefore, the only sufficient explanation for the uncaused first cause, which must exist, is God. Therefore, from this, we know that God must and does indeed exist. I will now begin discussing the scientific evidence that is combined with a logical argument. This appeals to obvious design that we see within all of life. Of course, if there is design, there must be a designer and creator, which would, in this case, be God. To clearly display this argument, here are the three parts. If life is observed to show evidence of design, there must exist a designer and creator, God. Life is indeed observed to show evidence of design. Therefore, there must exist a designer and creator, God. I will now begin discussing each of those parts separately. Clearly, if something shows evidence of design, it is only logical to accept the existence of a designer and creator of said something. This occurs frequently in archaeology whenever a new ancient structure or artifact has been discovered. Such things are known to have a designer and creator even if those people are unknown. Even in everyday life, when you see some magnificent houses or even some lower-end houses, even though one might not know who designed the plans for them nor who built them, one knows for certain that such people must exist, otherwise the houses wouldn't exist. In the same way, observing attributes of design in life then requires one to know for certain that a being designed and created. Now, I will provide multiple examples of rather obvious design in life. I am sure that after one examines and critically thinks about these evidences, the existence of the designer and creator God will be clearly seen as well. First, I will be relating what humans have intelligently designed to what we see in life, to clearly make the attributes of design visible if they are not already visible. Clearly, when we see the intricate design of a motor, it is no wonder that it was in fact design. Each part of the motor works together to complete the task it was created for. These are observed multiple times throughout life. Here's one example. Two Canadian researchers looked into the innermost workings of ATP synthase. Using electron cryomicroscopy, they produced the first ever three-dimensional representation of all the enzyme's parts fitted together the way they are in the actual enzyme. Their study results, published in the journal Nature, enable them to reconstruct the specific sequence of timed events that makes the enzyme work. And it's a good thing that it functions, because every living cell, from bacteria to brain cells, depends on one or another version of ATP synthase. The team found two half-channels situated in the base of the motor, forming something like two half-stroke cylinders. The first half-channel directs a single proton to a precise spot on one of the rotor's 12 segments, where a negatively charged oxygen atom receives and temporarily holds it. After spinning 330 degrees on the rotor, the proton re-enters the cylinder assembly through the second half channel and is finally released into an area of lower proton concentration. Clearly, this biological motor shows evidence of design to perform the function that all living cells depend upon. Another example to further drive this point of the attributes of design in life relating to gears is this. There is such a thing called biomimicry, which is the use of the designs in nature to inspire further designs. This was not the case with one design, gears. While humans designed gears without examining organisms, it was actually discovered at the University of Cambridge to be a part of a common insect found in Britain called Isus colopertratus, a species of plant hopper. This discovery was published in the scientific journal Science. Interestingly, the gears acted just like the gears human designed. As the teeth in the gears meshed, the legs moved in synchrony. The legs moved almost simultaneously. The difference between the two legs were observed to be as short as 30 millionths of a second. These gears are observed to work similarly to human-designed counterparts. Greg Sutton, a mechanical engineer, thinks the gears discovered could help humans build more efficient machines. The design in this organism is absolutely obvious, especially being directly compared to that which humans have designed, and being thought to even help humans design and build even more efficient machines. The next great evidence of design that will be examined lies within the human body. Perhaps it is already quite obvious as to the design of the human body, as well as the rest of life, if one takes merely a few seconds to just ponder on the external aspects clearly seen by the naked eye. It is almost the same as looking at a robot. Even if one does not know all of the internal mechanisms, which may not be visible to the naked eye, it is still clear that such has a designer and creator. The evidence that will be examined is, of course, not based merely upon visible to the naked eye external aspects, but rather is the internal aspects, some of which are microscopic. Specifically, the evidence that will be examined is DNA in the brain. DNA, the information contained in all of the living organism cells, is specifically operational information. This is the same category of the information that the code used in robotics or the operating systems of computers are placed in. DNA encodes for multiple things, including hair, eye, and skin color, as well as other physical properties about us. It encodes for the creation of protein molecules, which carry out all the functions necessary for life. It is important to note that not all sections of DNA code for proteins, but regulate the expressions of genes. To define DNA in one sentence, it is a molecule that encodes the genetic instructions used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms. As we can observe with the coding in robotics or in the operating systems of computers, The information was obviously designed with precision to accomplish specific tasks. Due to this, even if one does not know the person who created the code, it is only logical to acknowledge that it was in fact created by someone and did not just build itself. Operational information simply does not create itself. Rather, a mind, and quite an intelligent mind at that, created the information. Thus, the logical conclusion when examining the operational information within all of life, DNA, is that it was in fact created, as it could not have just created itself, being operational information, and so a creator is an absolute logical necessity. A creator must exist. The second evidence is the brain. Perhaps this is one of the greatest evidence of design in the human body and other living organisms that have one. The brain's flexibility in forming new connections and changing old ones enables us to quickly acquire new skills, learn new information, and create new memories. Further, if our brain suffers certain types of injury, brain cells can take over the function of the dead or damaged cells. Interestingly, the neurons that control our senses and motor skills are arranged into an orderly map in the brain. Our brain functions like a well-organized bookshelf with different spaces allocated to each sense or motor skill. The neurons responsible for touch are laid out in a three-dimensional sequence in the brain known as the spatial trajectory. If two parts of the body, such as the thumb and index finger, are located next to each other physically, they also have corresponding neurons that are next to each other in the brain. So when scientists attempt to map the sensory neurons in the brain, they find neurons that respond to stimulation of the thumb next to neurons that respond to stimulation of the index finger, and so on. The same holds true for neurons that control muscle movement. Although the neurons in the brain mirror the arrangement of the body parts, they do not mirror the relative size of the body parts. For example, while our arms and legs are much larger than our thumbs or lips, they occupy much less space in our brain. The fingers need more space because they require so many more neurons to control fine motor skills and delicate sensations. Our other senses have similarly orderly sequences in the brain. For example, the neurons involved in hearing are arranged by pitch, similar to the keys on a piano. Likewise, the neurons responsible for vision are arranged by sectors of our field of view. This creates an interesting challenge because we have two eyes that see overlapping fields of view. To compensate for this, the brain allocates alternating columns of neurons to the left and right eyes. Interestingly, if a finger is amputated or the nerve to the finger is destroyed, the neurons that were allocated to the finger become reallocated to the adjacent fingers. For example, if the index finger is lost, the neurons shift to covering the thumb and middle finger. In contrast, if a musician decides to practice with one finger more than all of the other fingers, the space allocated for that finger will increase at the expense of other fingers. The brain functions like a bookshelf with limited shelf space. If you need to add more pages to one of the books, then the increase needs to come at the expense of pages from other nearby books on the shelf. Behaviors or senses that are used more receive a greater allocation of space in the brain. This explains why individuals who are blind or deaf seem to have heightened sensitivity in other areas. The organization and layout of the nerve cells in the human brain is truly remarkable. The brain continues to change and adapt as well as repair itself throughout life. The brain follows an overall plan of development, but then alters based on experience, stimulation, and the environment. This alone is absolute, obvious evidence of design. Of course, there is much more to the brain than that already discussed. First, many people have mistakenly believed that the brain permanently stores all the information it encounters, but we just can't always access it. In fact, we forget many things which appear to be gone forever, and that's a good thing. Consider what happens if we remember too much. One famous psychology patient could remember lists of hundreds of random words without even trying, but this posed a huge problem. He had trouble forgetting anything. Even worse, he had difficulty distinguishing between useful and useless information. His brain was overloaded because he could not identify what was really important. Our brains are capable of processing an unimaginably complex stream of information. Trillions of bits pour into our brain every second from all of our senses. As we monitor the world, our brains must discard unless useless details and latch onto anything of short-term or long-term value. Unlike computers, our brains are self-organizing, self-governing, and self-repairing. The processing center doesn't file memories in a separate place. Instead, our brains use the same cells that store our memories to process information, and it builds memories by making new connections between these existing cells. This is better than a computer string of zeros and ones. Our memories aren't just random facts we pile up and recite on demand. Instead, our brain uses our memories to help us think creatively about new situations and even raise new questions. We are constantly assimilating outside information and incorporating it into how we think. The memories become a part of our thoughts. There is still much to learn about how all of it works. After all, the brain contains 100 billion cells, and each neuron can form tens of thousands of connections with other neurons. That adds up to 1 quadrillion connections, or 10 to the 15th power. A critical function of the brain is to sort out what we should remember and not remember. Memories are believed to go from short to long-term memory by reinforcement. Initially, the synapses involved in a memory trace are very weak. However, with repetition or linked to strong emotions, the connections become stronger and stronger. The brain has a special system of keeping all of the information organized. For starters, it distinguishes between two main types of long-term memory. They are processed and stored very differently. Declarative memory deals with the recall of facts and events. In contrast, procedural memory deals with how-to. Identifying your car or remembering the names of the presidents is declarative memory, whereas riding a bike or swimming is procedural memory. While we must consciously recall declarative facts, the brain typically applies procedural memory without our consciously thinking about it. Through brain scans, it is now believed that each memory is spread over many places in the brain. This is called the distributive model. Memory does not simply consist of individual cells storing separate facts, but a shared system requiring many different neurons. One advantage of spreading out information is that if one brain cell dies, the information is not permanently lost. Using multiple neurons alleviates this problem. This system is extremely helpful. Our lives are filled with situations that aren't identical but similar. The brain can pull up many similar memories to help us resolve new challenges quickly. The human brain has an amazing plasticity and capacity. Plasticity refers to how the brain can change in response to new experiences to create new memories. Capacity refers to the amount of information that can be stored. The fact that there are organized regions of the brain logically corresponding to the physical traits of the body, as well as there being so many different brain regions and processes involved in the storage and retrieval of memories, this is absolute clear evidence of design. Such a complex and organized mechanism is obviously design. Due to evidence of design being present, a designer must therefore exist. The scientific evidence of the design in the motors and gears in living organisms, as well as the clear design of DNA and the brain, all make it clear that there must have been a designer. It makes it absolutely clear that God must exist. Now I will enter into the historic evidence. So far, I have provided evidence that supports the existence and necessity of the existence of a God. However, this next evidence will make it clear which God is the one true God. In a later video, it will be discussed why there are so many false gods talked about. This historic evidence is that of the life, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. An assertion that has traveled through some communities is that Jesus was a myth. It is not merely asserting that Jesus did not perform the miracles stated in the Bible, but it is an assertion that Jesus Christ never even existed at all. It is also asserted that the only evidence of his existence is that in the Bible, which they commonly discredit as sufficient evidence. These claims are all, of course, contrary to the evidence. First, evidence within the Bible will be presented, as the idea that the Bible cannot be considered a reliable source of evidence for the existence of Jesus is not commonly held by all, and nor is it very logical anyways. The New Testament contains hundreds of references to Jesus Christ. There are those who date the writing of the Gospels to the 2nd century AD, more than 100 years after Jesus' death. Even if this were the case, which is strongly disputed by many, in terms of ancient evidences, writings less than 200 years after events took place are considered very reliable evidences. Further, the vast majority of scholars, Christian and non-Christian, will grant that the epistles of Paul, at least some of them, were in fact written by Paul in the middle of the 1st century AD, less than 40 years after Jesus' death. In terms of ancient manuscript evidence, this is extraordinarily strong proof of the existence of a man named Jesus in Israel in the early 1st century AD. It is also important to recognize that in AD 70, the Romans invaded and destroyed Jerusalem and most of Israel, slaughtering its inhabitants. Entire cities were literally burned to the ground. It is not surprising, then, if much evidence of Jesus' existence was destroyed. Many of the eyewitnesses of Jesus would have been killed. These facts likely limited the amount of surviving eyewitness testimony of Jesus. Considering that Jesus' ministry was largely confined to a relatively unimportant area in a small corner of the Roman Empire, a surprising amount of information about Jesus can be drawn from secular historical sources. Some of the more important historical evidences of Jesus, which are outside of the Bible, include the following. The 1st century Roman Tacitus, who is considered one of the more accurate historians of the ancient world, mentioned superstitious Christians from Christus, which is Latin for Christ, who suffered under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Suetonius, chief secretary to Emperor Hadrian, wrote that there was a man named Christus, or Christ, who lived during the 1st century. This is in Annals 1544. Julius Africanus quotes the historian Thallus in a discussion of the darkness which followed the crucifixion of Christ, in Extant Writings 18. Pliny the Younger, in Letters 1096, recorded early Christian worship practices, including the fact that Christians worshiped Jesus as God and were very ethical, and he includes a reference to the love feast and the Lord's Supper. The Babylonian Talmud, in Sanhedrin 43a, confirms Jesus' existence on the eve of Passover and the accusations against Christ of practicing sorcery and encouraging Jewish apostasy. Lucian of Samosata was a 2nd century Greek writer who admits that Jesus was worshipped by Christians, introduced new teachings, and was crucified for them. He said that Jesus' teaching included the brotherhood of believers, the importance of conversion, and the importance of denying other gods. Christians lived according to Jesus' laws, believed themselves to be immortal, and were characterized by contempt for death, voluntary self-devotion, and renunciation of material goods. Mara bar Seraponian confirms that Jesus was thought to be a wise and virtuous man, was considered by many to be the king of Israel, and was put to death by the Jews, and lived on in the teachings of his followers. Then we have all the Gnostic writings, the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Treatise on Resurrection, etc., that all mention Jesus. There is overwhelming evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ, both in secular and biblical history. Perhaps the greatest evidence that Jesus did exist is the fact that literally thousands of Christians in the 1st century AD, including the 12 apostles, were willing to give their lives as martyrs for Jesus Christ. People will die for what they believe to be true, but no one will die for what they know to be a lie. The assertion that Jesus Christ never existed is completely contrary to the evidence. Thus, I will continue on with this argument for God's existence with the fact that Jesus Christ was a historical person. Jesus is said to be God incarnate. Therefore, if there is any evidence or logical reasoning to support this, then it logically follows that God must exist. Two events that are subject to almost universal assent are that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist and was crucified by the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. The logical argument relates specifically to the crucifixion of Jesus. First, let's imagine a hypothetical situation. People go around claiming that a man resurrected after 3 days of lying in a tomb. Is this logical to accept as fact without any evidence to support it? Of course it isn't. First, the man would have had to have been well known, possibly for his actions or teachings. If anyone were to begin to try to accept this claim, it must be known that the man existed at all. Second, the man's death would have had to been a public execution, and so that people actually knew for an absolute fact he had died. There would have had to have been some form of security over the tomb, either guards or a seal to lock the door. This would make sure that the grave robbers didn't simply come and steal the body, and then claim that he had been resurrected. Fourth, in conjunction with the third hypothetical circumstance, the man said to have resurrected and appeared to people would need to have appeared to multiple people, either to a lot of people in separate occasions, or in front of a large mass of people all at once. This would ensure such was not just a hallucination or an outright lie. If the man appeared to several people separately as well as in front of many all at once, then it would most certainly be even more undeniable. In such occurring, it would be known as fact that such was not a lie or a hoax. Of course, the hypothetical situation that I have just described is parroting the historical events that are recorded in the Bible. First, Jesus was very well known at that point in time, known both for his profound teachings and the miracles he performed, such as healing the blind, healing the sick, walking on water, turning water into wine, etc. Even if one were to reject the miracles, they cannot logically deny that he was well known for his teachings. Second, he had a public execution at the hand of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. Everyone who had heard of him most likely knew he was killed. As noted in the Bible, there were guards at the tomb. It is written in Matthew 27:62-66. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. "Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first." "Take a guard," Pilate answered. "Go make the tomb as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Not only was a guard posted, but the stone was sealed shut in the entrance of the tomb. Fourth, of course in conjunction with this, Jesus was seen by two women, Matthew 28:9, by his disciples, Matthew 28:16-17, and even in front of over 500 people all at once, 1 Corinthians 15:6. It is good to note that when he appeared to his disciples, there was one, Thomas, who doubted, hence where the saying, "Don't be a doubting Thomas," comes from. To this, Jesus provided even more evidence, the evidence that Thomas said unless he saw, he would not believe, in order to prove that it was in fact him. He showed the disciples his wounds, the holes in his hands from being nailed to the cross, as well as the cut in his side from the spear that was used to ensure he was dead. The book of 1 Corinthians was written in about AD 55, only 2 or 3 decades after Jesus' crucifixion, approximately 60 to 61 years after Jesus' birth. This is the book in which it is recorded that Jesus appeared after his resurrection before over 500 people at once. This was most certainly written in a short enough amount of time for eyewitnesses to have still been alive as it records their words. There is no doubt one of the reasons as to why Christianity spread so rapidly. Claims that people had seen Jesus resurrected would not hold up unless there were hundreds of eyewitnesses to confirm that this was so. The fact is, Christianity spread so rapidly while containing such extraordinary claims. Extraordinary claims require pretty extraordinary evidence, which was provided to these hundreds of people. It would most certainly not have spread so rapidly and so far if these claims did not have evidence to back them up. It would not have been of any value to people if there wasn't any evidence at all, nor would it have been something glamorous, as early Christians were often, if not always, killed for their faith. The name Christian was actually first used as a derogatory term by pagans at Antioch for the followers of Christ, Acts 11:26 and Acts 26:28. The fact of the matter is, no one would be willing to die for something they knew was a lie, or even die for something they had any doubts at all about, unless they were absolutely sure of what had happened and was led to proclaim it boldly even unto death. they would not have been willing to die for it. Thus, the logical conclusion from all of this historical evidence and logical reasoning is that Jesus Christ was in fact God incarnate. Therefore, this is, logically, evidence of the existence of God. As has been examined, the existence of God has been not only supported, but made to be clearly a necessity through a philosophical argument, scientific evidence, and logical reasoning, as well as historical evidence and logical reasoning. There are, of course, dozens of other philosophical arguments, thousands more scientific evidences, and further historical evidence to absolutely support the existence of God. As well, it is the Judeo-Christian God, evidenced through the perspective of a Christian. However, while all this evidence is great, the most powerful testimony to the existence of God is His outstanding power, which is, of course, promised through the Holy Spirit by Jesus Christ and God the Father Himself through His Word. Thousands, if not millions, of people have experienced the power of God in a real, physical way. As Dr. Michael Brown said, "It is true that God calls us to live by faith, but it is not a blind faith. It is a real faith that produces real, tangible results." Such people, like myself, experience the power of God in being saved from our sin. Jesus saving us is not just an event that will take place in the end times or when we die, but is substantiated in our own lives, saving us from the stronghold and slavery of sin. This real, tangible power in our everyday lives provides us with even more evidence, so much so that it would be absolutely illogical and foolish for a true servant of the Lord Jesus to suddenly deny Him. Of course, such evidence is personal and would not necessarily be accepted by people as a reason to believe, and therefore they never personally experience the same evidence on their own. However, the evidence that has been provided earlier, as well as all of the evidence provided elsewhere by more skilled theologians, philosophers, and scientists, should be absolutely sufficient enough to accept the reality of the existence of the Judeo-Christian God from the perspective of a Christian. If you would like to discuss what has been examined in this video, I highly encourage you to email me at discuss.theservantofthelord@gmail.com, as the salvation of every person is unimaginably important to me. If I do not answer quickly, it is most likely due to schoolwork. If you feel that I do not present a good enough answer, I highly encourage you to send in a question to www.gotquestions.org. From this point on, all videos created will go on the basis that God most certainly does exist, as well as that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and God incarnate. God bless you.